right, cool. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I lost my window there for a second, but I got it back. Technology is hard. Thanks for everyone for joining us tonight. We have an awesome time on Wednesday, which is normally not a night that we're ever on, but this is going to be a good time. We are here. We're picking a single barrel of Westland American single malt. Blake, Chris, John, thanks for joining us. How are you guys?
Oh, it's actually me. It's not John. I know I look like John down here. Got my sport coat on. I'm ready to go.
HD, a blazer. Like I love it. This is great.
I almost went with the high and tight. Went to the barber today.
Yeah, good idea.
I love it.
Getting confused for Kenny. I want the John Henderson confusion now.
Yikes!
One of these days we'll do enough people where it's just like an episode of the Brady Bunch, but everybody will look exactly the same. Well, this will be a good time.
We're starting out embarrassingly.
Yeah, it can only go up from here. Oh, great. Sure. Well, thank you for everyone that's joining us. We are kind of recommitting to doing more tastings now that kind of summer vacation is over. And tonight we are picking from Westland. So, folks, if you don't know Westland, they're out in Seattle, Washington, which is near and dear to my heart. That's where I grew up for a while. So, American single malt, which is something we have not picked yet. It's crazy. We're doing 100 barrels in 2021. This is the first American single malt. So it's time to get off our asses. It's time to pick some single malt, and I'm looking forward to this tonight. So Chris, thanks for joining us. What do you do at Westland, my friend?
Yeah, this is awesome. Well, first, thanks for having me in. I am the VP of Sales over at Westland Distillery. I've been there for a little over 5 years now, and we obviously started back in 2010. So we're on the younger side for, I think, the sort of new wave of American distilleries, but we've really been sort of leading the emergence of this, frankly, this whole new category of whiskey and American single malt, which we're super excited about, obviously. And, Jay, you'll know this from growing up in the Pacific Northwest, but, we're a region that grows barley. This is, for us to make bourbon or rye would deem, I'd argue, not necessarily false, but it would certainly feel a little out of place. Whereas, 90 minutes just north of our distillery, we've got one of the best agricultural regions in the world in Skagit Valley. Just over the Cascades, east of Seattle, you've got some massive barley growing regions in the Palouse. And yeah, we're really excited to produce a whiskey that's got a genuine sense of place that embodies this sort of element of provenance that everyone seems to be talking about right now.
I love it. I think it's super cool. And, I never, we spend a lot of time in like Kentucky and Indiana, those really hot, Midwestern areas. So it's fun to see whiskey coming from different places. Is the climate, before we really dig in here, is the climate any kind of a troublesome? Is it a handicap? Is it a feature? Is it a pro? Is it a con?
It's a pro typically. Obviously, we've had a pretty warm summer in Washington State. We've touched 100 on a few ones. Today was another incredibly hot day. It's going to have an impact on when you see barley harvest. You'll see things get accelerated as the result of that. But classically, if you look at it from a maturation environment, it's about as ideal as it gets for a barley-based spirit. Barley's a really nuanced style spirit. It doesn't have a lot of the same intensity that I would say a corn or a rye based spirit typically do. So there's a lot more nuance that you need to be able to pick up. And you've got to be really mindful of the way that you're going to utilize oak and the amount of influence that that's going to provide to the spirit in a mature whiskey.
Okay. I like it. Now, I apologize. I'm going to serve you a softball because I already know the answer, but are all of,
love it.
It's Wednesday night softball, but just for our listeners here. So are all of your barrels aging in the same place? Are they all aging near Seattle, or you guys got them spread around like another notable was, Washington State producer?
So I would say it's 95 or 99% and 1%. So historically speaking, so the barrels that you guys are selecting now would have been matured down in our Hoquiam facility, which is about 2.5-ish hours just out on the Pacific coast. So a much cooler, much rainier environment than even Seattle is, which is, I would imagine for some people hard to believe, but Hoquiam is a temperate rainforest. It has a huge impact on the maturation there. We've actually just built these beautiful new rack houses up in the Skagit Valley, and I can talk a little bit why we've made that change, but those barrel warehouses just came online in the last couple of months. The remainder of the product, we keep literally an incredibly small amount, maybe 100 barrels at the distillery. I would argue for aesthetic purposes, but I think by the end of this evening, you'll see that there's actually some really neat little maturation things that happen as the result of that. And it really creates some really kind of wild outlier barrels that I think is what a barrel program should be all about.
Okay. I mean, we like diversity. For everyone who's watching too, we have these really nice, some places just give you like 3 Bostons with like masking tape. These came with like fancy cards. They have all the info. So when I send out a wrap-up email, I will write down all of this stuff because this is super info rich. So I thank you for sending that along. Because like I said, sometimes you just get like it's 2 ounces and it has blue masking tape. Like, all right, let's give it a go. But really well put together.
Yeah, we rewrote our barrel program about a year ago. So we had a pretty unique barrel program for a while. What we were doing, we were offering whiskeys at cask strength that would have more classically fit into what our original core range was, which was our American oak, our sherry wood, and our peated. Great whiskeys, very specific profile to each of them. The idea being is that we could offer those at full proof, or what would have been the individual components that would have gone into those whiskeys at full cask strength. And people loved it. But we found that the barrel selection committees and the industry was shifting a little bit, where people wanted things that were more bespoke to their selection criteria. And we've got such a diversity in terms of raw material that we have accessible to us, whether it's in the mash that we utilize. So it's 100% barley, but the different types of barley that we use, the types of barrels, whether it's air dried oak or ex-bourbon or any sort of a finishing cask. And in the case of some of the stuff tonight, actually barrels that have been fully matured in what would be historically considered finishing casks. So about a year ago, I sat down with our production team, with our Skagit type manager, Scott Sell, and our master blender, Shane Armstrong. And we had this great moment where it was like, okay, how does the program need to evolve to match what people are looking for in barrel programs now? And admittedly, I'll be the first to admit, this is where the bourbon industry has kind of led the rest of the animal down the aisle a little bit here. So we said to ourselves, well, we want to be interesting to people that are looking at these kind of things. Barrel programs have just completely shifted the dynamics of this business. It used to be a very much sort of like the distillery talked to the account talked to the consumer talked to other consumers, and that was the way that you sort of got people interested in it. And boy, oh boy, has that changed in like what feels like just a few years. I'm sure it's been a gradual shift for 5 or 6, but in the 15 odd years I've been in the industry, I mean, it's amazing how different it feels than when it was. And frankly, I kind of love it because a lot of times that information didn't necessarily make its way back to the distillery unfiltered. And that's through no one's fault, but I think that people tend to be polite to a fault. And the reality is that good distilleries want to hear the good and the bad. They want to take real feedback and be able to use that as a way to implement, frankly, interesting choice and to give consumers what they're actually asking for.
I like it. And then, that's kind of the fun part of doing the barrel program too, is that like literally, on one hand you have the consumer and, enough consumers say, I want this thing. And then we go and make it happen and find a distillery that does it. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
I think that, that signals a good time. What do you say, guys? Should we start drinking whiskey? What did
Drink whiskey.
John, Blake, what have you guys poured? Should we do a specific order? Because I don't really care.
I was waiting. Yeah. We could start with, well, I don't know, Chris, do you have any suggestions of, kind of a process we should take, or just, hey, jump in, whatever's first?
I would, if it were my choice, and again, I'm here as a casual observer of all the interesting and unique things, and I'm not wearing a blazer, so my opinion should only count for like 60% of what yours do. But I would suggest starting with 775. That would be the cask that I would do. I think it gives you the most broad spectrum of what we're sort of known for at Westland specifically. That would be my argument for a starter.
Okay.
I warmed up the night with Guyana or
Garyana.
Garyana. There it is.
Yeah.
I warmed up.
I was
with
like,
that. So
rum question mark?
Gary. Oh,
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah.
Which I did feel a little bit dumb. I had a bottle, I drank it a while back, and then I just got some of the new release, and I go to open it and I go to pull real hard on the cap, and I'm like, oh, it's a got me.
Yep, it's happened to the best of us. I totally get that. Now this 775 is our classic 5 malt mash. So this is, I would argue, the thing that Westland is probably the most known for is our use of what we call 5 malt. So it is a Washington State grown 2-row pale malt base. It makes up about 70% of the mash condition. And then there is about 10% Munich malt, so a lightly kilned malt, 12% Briess Extra Special, Jay, out of your home state. That's out of Briess in Wisconsin. And then 4% each of brown malt and pale chocolate malt that we source from Thomas Fawcett out in the UK. And it's, wow. This is the thing that I would say, if someone asked you, what's the thing that makes Westland separate? The reality is that it's the way that we think about raw material and the importance that it has to flavor development in a whiskey. So whereas everyone in the universe of single malt, and I shouldn't say everyone is sort of a broad brushstroke, but let's say on the whole, the assumption is that most single malt distilleries, if you were to take what their mash was and to turn it into beer, it would effectively be a pale ale or a lager or something light. What you're taking from Westland out of the mash and then putting into fermenters and then into the stills, that would effectively be like a brown ale, a stout in that sort of a profile. And historically, producers had always kind of said, well, those things don't matter. That flavor gets torn up in distillation. And that's just ludicrous. The reality is that you've got an adjacent industry in brewing that for 100 odd years has been saying, no, barley is critical to the flavor development of our beer. But for some reason, distilleries just broadly went like, yeah, no, we're good with that science. We're not going to go that way. And that's not the way we think at Westland. Westland is like a pretty academic, nerdy community. And frankly, it's what really drew me to the distillery, in the beginning.
Okay. I like it. And it's nice to see too, like some places really are placing a lot of emphasis on fermentation and like brewing well first and then keeping it going into distillation and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
man.
we use a Belgian Saison yeast for all of our fermentation. We're using, and in case people are curious, want to look it up, we're using Fermentis T58, which is their Belgian Saison. We do run our fermentation at a little bit of a higher temperature. We let it get closer to terminal, which the sort of impact there is that we get a lot more of this ester, fruity, cherry, orange peel, lemon zest thing on the nose. I can't speak to specifically how much 775 has that because there's some new oak there for maturation, but certainly that is like a kind of classic note that Westland gets in, certainly in the aromatics.
Okay. I was going to say, I was going to ask about the yeast because on the nose, it reminds me of like West E12, like one of those big Trappist Belgian, really malty caramely. Really interesting.
Yeah, it's rarely do you feel like you pick up the different malts along the way, like kind of meld together. But I feel like this, you get the malty caramely up front. I get some nice fruit actually on the palate. I don't know if that's the Saison yeast or just some of the difference. And then on the finish, I feel like I'm picking up a lot of that brown malt.
Yeah, I get that sort of, it reminds me of like the aromatics of like freshly ground coffee. And then there's certainly some of that like semi-sweet baking chocolate on the finish.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it's all beer on the nose and it's all espresso on the finish. That's really nice.
Yep. That is, to me, that is
how I start my day
quintessential.
is beer than espresso.
8 a.m. beer,
on the
9
nose.
a.m. espresso.
Good move.
To me, that is like quintessential Westland House profile, what you're getting out of 775. That is, if people were to ask, what is the taste that you want people to sort of like have lingering on their lips after a Westland event? Like it's that chocolate, a little bit of coffee, some fruit forwardness. That's really what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Admittedly, it's been years since I've had kind of the standard core offerings, but this brings me right back. Like it's like a day hasn't gone by.
It's on like a chocolate toffee type thing going on the palate too. I like how it kind of shifts from one gear to the next. It doesn't really just kind of hang out there.
I think when Jay and I were kind of going back and forth in the sample offerings and we were looking through the register, it was one of the things is like, how do we get people to experience just like, what is Westland? For people that are in, the our bourbon community or certainly in all of your respective circles that are familiar with Westland, that might be an easy thing. But the reality is that, we're, and I was saying this before the show, but we're a little bit behind enemy lines here, right? I think there's this assumption that like, oh no, the world has to be corn and rye based distillate, but this is a big country. I think we often lose sight of things because we're so hyper localized in our own communities to being like, here's my local beers, here's my local wineries, here's my local distilleries, that we forget that the agricultural systems on the West Coast are quite different from the agricultural systems, certainly on the East Coast or even in the middle parts of America, even through the Plain States. So, when we talk about what is the American spirit, I think it's really hard to say that sort of definitively and say, well, this one thing that really does have obviously it doesn't have a pure classic geographic identity to it, but there is certainly an element of like, oh yeah, it makes sense that this thing is here. I'll tell you, it's a 2-second tangent, but years ago, a guy came up to us at a tasting, and this was like one of those like excellent West Coast communication moments where guy comes up, really wants to talk. He's flanneled up. We're ready to get into it. I was excited.
He's flanneled
and
up.
He's flanneled up. And he says this 100% with nothing but honesty in his heart. And I absolutely loved it. He goes, if this country had been settled west to east, single malt would be the American whiskey. And I was like, that is a wild thing, because I mean, effectively, if you think if people settled this country from west to east, the ability to grow barley in substantial quantity would have been accessible to them right away, instead of having to kind of go, oh no, let's plant rye, then let's plant corn. And then it wasn't until they got to the plain states that you really saw the ability to start growing barley in any sort of real tonnage.
Oh, that's crazy. I wouldn't have thought about that. But I mean, the marketing department must have been like, shit, we got to write this down. It's a story we've gotten a lot of mileage out of that. I'm not going to lie. I love it.
That's
I mean,
good.
It's a great sentiment. Like, because it is interesting. Like, people think of American single malt as the underdog. Like, Stranahan's and Westland are about the only two, like, it's hard to call them legacy because, like you mentioned, 2010 to now, but like that's the longest running American single malt that I can really think of, besides maybe McCarthy's in Oregon and stuff. But, you've got, 100 plus years to catch up. So I like it. I think it's
the crazy thing to think, Jay, is that when we started the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission in roughly 16, right? We were with a number of other producers. We're in a basement at Benny's, hashing out what the definition is. It happens really quickly. We go from a handful, literally like a dozen producers, maybe at the time we're doing this, to now I want to say the growing count is just under 200 distilleries that are producing at least a single malt within their portfolio. Now, there's only a very small handful within that, like Westland, that exclusively producing malt. That's all we do. It's what we believe in. It's a whiskey that makes sense for a Washington State distillery. But it's incredible to see the level of growth that it has. And to know that we're possibly a year away from the federal government acknowledging the standard of identity that we put forward. I mean, it's a really exciting moment, to say the least.
No kidding.
That's a quick turnaround from 2016 to, it happens in a year. Like, that's pretty insane how quickly that has happened. So, I mean, congrats on that. But
yeah,
do you see others trying to jump in on the American single malt name without following kind of the guidelines you've set out, or that hasn't really been as much of an issue?
I think the reality is that most people that are going to put the time and effort and frankly the financial need into making single malt, they want to do it the right way. And there's such an established precedent for what single malt means globally. Single distillery, 100% malted barley, that I think what you'd find is that people would be worried to do something sort of outside of the realm of that. The open comment period that the TTB opened for this on what the standard of identity would be, it brought up some really interesting points. And they were things that the membership of the commission were pretty clear. Like, no, we want to do this thing. Like, one of the things that we kept out was there's no age component. It was really important that we allowed producers to kind of produce what they want. I think when you start getting into, it has to go in this cask, it has to be aged this long. I effectively think of it as a funnel, right? You've taken all of the creativity that exists broadly within the spectrum of whiskey making there. And as the minute you put in these parameters that are limiting, you get to a much more narrow sort of strip of what would be coming out of these distilleries. And that's not what we want. The reality is, like, I want distilleries that are going to make great whiskey. I think distilleries would be wise to recognize that the best judge and jury on the planet is an American consumer with disposable income. They will tell you whether or not your whiskey is good and worth buying. And they are quick to tell you.
And they will do so loudly.
They will do so loudly. Yeah. But that's great. I think that's what I think genuine producers that want to make things that they're excited about, that they know other people will get excited about, they want that sort of feedback.
Interesting. Okay. I think that's pretty cool. So before we get to our next sample here, so you mentioned not removing parameters. So it is quite literally, and I should be on top of this, but it's been a while since I read after the open form. So basically the only requirement to be an American single malt is produced in America and uses barley. Is that pretty much the skeleton framework there? It's
a couple of them. So single distillery, 100% malted barley, distilled to no higher than 80%, bottled no lower than 40%, and it must be matured in an oak cask. No specificity to new or used, no specificity to length of time, no specificity aside from the basic, it must be bottled at 40% thing for whiskey. But yeah, I think that leads a lot up to the creativity of the distiller, which is, it's to the benefit of any industry to allow people to sort of explore what they think they can make out of their equipment.
I love it. I think that's super cool. So we'll keep an eye on that. But, coming up, it'll be nice to see American Single Malt as its own category. And I know some places have tried to do like Colorado. Was it Strainahan's that tried to do, was it Colorado whiskey or Colorado Single Malt? Have they given way to just going to American Single Malt?
They have. They've the good folks in Colorado have made the right call, and they've adjusted their packaging now to saying American Single Malt whiskey, which is great. I think, listen, early on there was challenges there, because how do you put something on the packaging that doesn't necessarily have a classic standard of identity, that's non-enforceable, doesn't actually mean anything? I mean, we proudly put American Single Malt whiskey on our packaging from day one, because we knew that was what we were shooting for. It was, and I can say that this was this thing just for Westland, but the reality is this, the whole team at Westland, all of us, there's 30 odd employees now. We're whiskey lovers by definition. We're whiskey consumers as well. I mean, I've got a house full of whiskey here. A lot of it says Westland, but not all of it does. And Blake can tell. Blake's got my receipts. He knows what I buy from Seelbachs. I'll tell you, it's embarrassing. Don't ever tell my wife, Blake. Please.
Yeah, I mean, you're selling yourself out here. I was never going to say.
That's like
all safe with Blake. He's got us all protected.
But I think
or blackmailed, one of the two.
It's both.
But I think that's the mindset. It was, if you're a consumer of whiskey, what do you want? You want transparency, you want the ability to make an informed decision, and you want quality to be the primary criteria for the people making it. That, to me, that's it. If those are the things that distilleries do, the reality is that you're going to end up with good whiskey.
Okay, I like it. To hit one question that rolled on in from our good friend Pete, I believe he was saying that it has to be bottled at least 40%. The requirement is not that it is bottled at 40%. It just can't be below 40%. So, and this is pardon me for like patting myself in the back here. This is a perfect segue into the next sample, 2423, because this is not 40%, if I'm not mistaken.
Tis not.
Sure? We talked about it a little bit in the green room, but this son of a bitch is a little bit higher than 40%. So if we want to move on here to
swings in a heavier weight class.
Tell us about sample 2423 here. I've got it poured. Hopefully you do too, John and Blake. This is definitely interesting. I'll leave it at that. What are we drinking here?
So let's start how it's consistent with the 775 sample. So both of these are 100% 5 malt. Actually, all three of your samples are our 5 malt recipe. So the mash condition hasn't been adjusted here. Same yeast, same fermentation parameter, same distillation technique. The difference here is that the entirety of the maturation of this whiskey was done in a rewind cooperage red wine cask. That is highly unusual for us. Typically, we would use those for finishing. So for maybe 18, 24 months. The entirety of the life of this whiskey was in that cask. So on this one here, this barrel got filled on January 28th of 2015, and it got harvested in February of this year. So it is a long-term maturation, certainly by our parameters here.
Damn. Okay. Can you red wine? I love red wine. Red wine is a big term. Are you able to specify it all, or is that kind of where the buck stops?
I can't tell you what the producer is, not because I want to be cagey, but because genuinely we don't know who it is.
Totally cool.
These things are a little more generic. I would say it's a pretty safe bet. That cooperage is out of Oregon. The reality is that we'll probably see either GSM, so Grenache Syrah Mourvedre, which in tasting this, I tend to get a little bit of those elements. I definitely don't get that it's a Pinot cask. So my assumption is it's GSM here, because there's a lot more fullness to this than I typically got out of Pinot casks.
Man, I like GSM, so that's a wonderful bouquet of different varietals.
Yeah,
we see Pinot Noir like from the Bull Run folks and from a lot of others, so it is kind of nice to see that set apart as well. Did we talk about the proof on this one?
We didn't. So remember earlier when I was telling you guys about that 1% of barrels that don't make the trip to Hopium and haven't made the trip up to Skagit Valley? Well, this is one of those 1% little barrels that didn't make the trip. We fill our barrels at 2 distinct proofs, depending on what type of cask it is. So all air-dried New White American oak, which is the classic style of cask that we use at Westland. So we use Independent Stave Company for all our air-dried oak. Those get filled at 55% ABV. Anything that is a second fill barrel, a red wine cask, a rum barrel, a finishing cask of any sort, those would get filled at 62.5. And we have the sort of climate where typically what we see is a 0.5 percentage point to 0.75 percentage point reduction in proof year on year for maturation. So this whiskey is, I think if memory serves correct, it's just a touch over 6 years old. So you would anticipate that this whiskey would be in the 50s. It is not. This whiskey is clocking in at just a touch over 70% ABV. The reason for that is that this whiskey spent its entire maturation at the distillery in Seattle in our cask room. So if you've ever been to the distillery, you'll know that that sort of center hallway as you're walking into the mash platform area is where we keep some barrels. It's a nice aesthetic look. We use it for private rentals. Because it's quite a bit drier and it's temperature controlled, those barrels can quickly rise in ABV. And obviously this is a prime example of it. The interesting thing is actually the outturn on this wasn't terribly low. So this is a standard 53. And I want to say the outturn on this was almost 200 bottles, which that is really high for us for that age, along with that ABV.
Wow.
Whew. Yeah.
Damn. Well, one of the things we were talking about too is that you mentioned we were going to be surprised because, you know, going in, I had no idea. And even on the nose, like this has no indication of proof over maybe like 52, 55%. So I'm curious, John,
No, definitely.
John, Blake, what do you guys think? This is
no on the nose, man. This thing is like, I would not have pegged this for being high proof at all, let alone over, you know, whatever it is, just a hair over 140 proof, 70%. But it's nice.
I can remember
it's got a good fruit component right off the bat.
When we pulled these, when these samples started getting pulled, I reached back out to Shane and Scott and I said, guys, you've got to check to make sure there's not like an input error here. I was like, that is highly unusual. But actually the sister cask to this, or sibling cask, however you want to describe it, was also quite high. So we'll typically fill a couple of these barrels in a run. So that way we get some level of, hey, let's see how these are sort of going, but they were all quite high in the ABV. This one was the highest.
Wow. And so what would this have gone into the cask at? What proof?
62.5.
Okay.
Yeah, so this has gone up almost 8 points.
Wow, yeah, that climbed a lot.
Which is, I mean, like absolutely just floors me for Seattle. Because, you know, we talk about like people just think it rains all the time. It's 55 degrees all year round, which is like mostly right until the last couple of years. I've never seen it break 110, but I had people sending me screenshots from your heat stroke earlier this year.
But it's, I mean, I'm sure you guys will appreciate this because you've been in plenty of distilleries, but it's a lot warmer in a distillery than it is in a rack house in Hoquiam. I mean, it is noticeably warmer there. It's a much drier environment, so you're going to lose water at a much faster rate than obviously you'll break down distillate.
It's just crazy for me to think that something in Seattle is gaining ABV. Like, I just like something in my brain is like, what? No, you know, crazy. But
I giggled a little bit when you picked this. I was super excited because I went through and when we do these barrel pulls up, I'll go through and I'll taste everything and write my own notes. And there were a couple that really stood out. And these, I will say, these red wine casks like floored me.
Yeah, I love the fruit note here.
I was gonna say
it really starts out with a ton of fruit.
Just like a deliciousness of a fruit note, not necessarily like acidity, or it's just rounded fruit, like almost more dried fruit than kind of fresh fruit. But man, really good.
I think it really works too, like right from the fruit on the nose, and it kind of almost dives into like this savory segment where it's like I start thinking of like the Chris, we were talking backstage about what was the ice cream place, Jay, like Friendlies and Dairy Queen.
Pralines.
Yes, you get that smell of like the ice cream shop kind of going on, like the chocolate milkshake almost. I mean, there's like a really cool evolution of this thing, and geez, the finish is like eternal. It's just there's a ton in there to dissect.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of grip to this. I mean, you can kind of chew through this whiskey for sure.
Yeah. One of the things that I really like too, and every time I see red wine with American whiskey, you know, and especially too, like you guys are very close to Woodinville. I think they do a lot of wine finishes, but for me, those are always, okay, I'm getting the wine first and there's a little bit of the whiskey character in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is an excellent parallel between like, there's the malt, there's the wine, we're back to the malt. Like it's, you know, that waffle cone, nougat, caramel, but then here's the red berry, blackberry, you know, they seem very nicely integrated. And honestly, the proof, like it's like, you know, you get some of that ethanol, like you can feel it, the tingle on your tongue, but even blind, I'd still put this closer to 60 than 70, which I think is just insane, because like Charbet over on California coast, like they've released some 70% stuff, and like, you know, the second you put it in your body that is 70%. Like, you breathe fire, your eyes get a little watery, and like, it's amazing, but going down, it just like is just screaming the whole way. So I'm really surprised that the experience is very different for, you know, kind of a West Coast whiskey at this proof.
This whiskey is, if this whiskey is the pick, if the name isn't Ethanol Chameleon, you've completely missed out on an opportunity here. I mean, again, it doesn't, I know, and for people that are listening, it's obviously hard to get a sense of this, but it's just so not the proof on the palate. It's not even close. It's not there on the aromatics. It's not there on the nose. It's not there on the proof or on the palate. It's not there on the finish. You were kind of mentioning this, but one of the challenges with red wine casks that I think a lot of producers deal with is that the whiskeys tend to have this, like, I would describe it as unfortunate. This is my personal perspective, but this unfortunate pop of like acid mid palate where it's like this, it feels disjointed, where you've got like, instead of it being like this nice rolling hill in terms of the flavor, it's like a very sharp point and then it comes right back down. And I don't personally like that. I tend to like whiskeys that have a little more of a rolling palate flavor where the all of the things work together. It's not like there's one thing that's kind of just trying to pull out of the glass and then everything else is along for the ride.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm actually pretty impressed. Like, really, really nice integration there, especially for the red wine, which is also an excellent segue into sample 3, which, so red wine here does not mean like sherry, does not mean PX, does not mean Oloroso or Manzanilla or, you know, Amontillado. But our third sample is finished, if I'm not mistaken, in Oloroso sherry, correct?
It is.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is. So it's an Oloroso sherry hogshead. This is out of from Toneleria del Sur. So we've been working with the Caballo family that owns this cooperage out in Montilla, Spain for a number of years. The way that we source our sherry casks from them is quite a bit different from what we'll call the sort of industry norm. So the industry norm is almost always what you'll refer to as hoop and stave, right? They get broken down, packed flat, really efficient way to do it. You'll send them to a number of different cooperages domestically, or in Scotland, they typically go up to Craigellachie. They'll get rebuilt and then shipped off to the distillery. We prefer to buy our barrels as known as like sort of upright and wet. So effectively, the barrel has like a very small amount of resinous liquid in it, so it can keep shape during shipping. It ships directly to us, and then we try to fill those barrels after, you know, dumping whatever's inside of them. We'll try to fill those barrels as quickly as possible, so we get as much of that profile. You know, hand on heart, sherry barrels are expensive. We are, to the best of our knowledge, the largest holder of sherried American whiskey in this country right now, which is super exciting. But it's also one of those things where it's like, you kind of have to do sherry when you do single malt. It is I don't know if sort of rite of passage is the right way of describing it, but it's an expectation of the industry where it's like, can you do a nuanced sherry whiskey where it's not just one note, kind of like nougat, and that's it? Can you do something where you're going to get a lot? And that's admittedly why I really love Oloroso, because you get so much more of the barnyardy, fruity, dried fruit kind of things instead of the, you know, just the big, heavy nougat kind of flavors. I am super thrilled to see Oloroso instead of PX, because, you know,
this guy okay. How much of the second sample did you have, Jay?
I am what I am. Yeah, all 2 ounces. Yeah, so when I like pass out in 8 minutes. But no, it was really interesting to see Oloroso, which we see a lot of American producers using PX, and I think PX is so, not that Oloroso is easy either, but PX, you got to get it exactly right, or everything is just totally wrong because it's so sweet and syrupy. So Oloroso, I think, is historically been my favorite of the sherries from Malt. So I was super excited to see Oloroso come across the desk here too.
And for people that love sherry, what's cool about this is a full maturation as well. There's no finishing here. Actually, all 3 of these barrels, and this was unusual. Jay, I don't think we intended for this, but all 3 of the barrels you picked were full maturation, 1 cask type. There was no, 5 years here, 3 years of this, or 3 years of this, 2 years of this. These were all sort of all in. That 775 is a very early cask, like pre-1000s. That barrel was distilled in like 13.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, that's an old bottle of whiskey by Westland standards. That is an old bottle of whiskey. Hell, by most American bourbon standards, that's an old bottle of whiskey at this point.
Oh, yeah. Damn. Yeah, that's 7 years, 7 months if I'm doing.
You don't see a ton in that +4 age range, much less 7.5 years old. What's crazy on this 2949, I smelled it and I was like, dang, this smells like whenever my kids ask me to open up a box of raisins for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I look down and it's like raisins, maple syrup. So, and I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what it smells like. And then you start to get a little more of that sweetness and a little more of that Oloroso, but it really just balances nicely in like a dried fruit, not as or way more than the previous one. I feel like the previous cast had a little bit of dried fruit, but this is just like,
I can picture that exact moment you're talking about. Like you've pulled the box of raisins out of that big long sleeve, and like you like fight with the little tabs and you crack it. Yeah. And you're like, oh.
And that's what this whiskey is, and it's pretty dang delicious. But
it's funny. It reminds me, and this is going to sound super dumb. It reminds me of the turn on the golf course, because when I would golf with my grandparents, like my grandfather would be like, all right, let's get a Snickers and a beer. And grandma would be like, let's get some raisins. And she'd like pull out this huge thing of raisins and like everyone would get a box of raisins. And like that smell just hits you. And it's super reminiscent. I didn't think about that until you said it.
Beer, though.
Well, yeah.
Well, a little bit of the beer too. You get a little bit of that yeasty note on the.
I love it. This is really interesting. What do you think, John?
A pretty velvety mouthfeel to it as well.
Yeah. What's the proof? Yeah, 108. Which is still high proof, but man.
But this is what you would expect. This is what you should expect for Hoquiam and then obviously now Skagit maturation. Like this has come down obviously. So filled at 62.5. You're down at 108. So this is more in line with what I would call the classic Westland Northwestern sort of maturation profile.
Man, that's delicious.
Mm-hmm. It's like I don't know if it's because it went third, but it's like a dessert almost. Like
it is desserty.
It just really easy to drink, and I'm like trying to slow myself down so that I don't start slurring notes later on down the line. But yeah, I'm going for a second pour on this one. I'm going to call it revisiting the sample.
Yeah, like honestly, like this is obviously phenomenal neat, but I would, even if like on a hot day like this on a big cube with just like a dash or two of bitters is almost like a just like cocktail ready to go.
See, now you're talking about the type of cocktails I like.
Yeah, you do cocktails weird. Every cocktail you make is 2 ingredients, and one of them is black walnut bitters.
Yeah.
Don't they just call it a mixed drink if there's only 2 ingredients? Could we get a
I don't even know if I'm actually mixing these things, man.
I think a Henderson Long Island has like 2.5.
Yeah.
The Henderson Long Island is just like 5 ounces of bourbon and 4 dashes of black walnut bitters.
Yeah, pretty much.
Is that what you're telling me?
If you want to get a little wild, you can put it in an ounce of rye.
That's the only time someone has ever described a Long Island, and I've actually been like, yeah, I would drink that.
That's the only Long Island I want to drink. I'll be
fair enough.
I'm happy to help, guys. I live to serve.
Oh, man. This is really nice.
I don't know.
So
I could pick a favorite.
What's crazy is like, I feel like I could, if somebody said, hey, argue for each of these to be the winner, I have my like how I would argue it on each and every one of them. And they're all different and they all have a different argument and they all kind of highlight and, really show off a different part of the whiskey. With 775, I feel like that's just really a classic single malt. It's so nuanced. There's a lot of depth there. 243, the alcohol integration at 140 proof is pretty incredible. And then 2949 is just like a dessert. I want to just keep drinking it. It's really tasty. It's, raisins on the golf course. So basically sells itself at that point. And
it's true.
Right. So I'm I mean, are there any favorites amongst the crowd yet? Or although Chris's glass is empty, he's just going to let us sit here and talk about it.
I'm going to be honest with you. I've been kind of going back and forth, and this is as effective as like my Instagram with my wrist and random watch picture gets here. But like, hey, drinking a bunch of Garyon and Caleri, like, I would love to all the time. Of course, I left Seattle about a week ago to come back to the East Coast, and just not thinking about it even twice, I tasted through all the samples and then proceeded to not bring myself home a set. So I was going through my notes today as I was like, yeah, and recalling these. Listen, you've got 3 casts that I think showcase. All of them showcase really interesting facets of Westland, which I'm not sure that our single cast program historically did that. I think our single cast program years ago was, look what these whiskeys can be when they're at full proof. And now what we're showing is, frankly, I would argue the range of the type of whiskey that we can produce under, some really interesting conditions. There's not a bad cask in this. Someone was texting me earlier that's pretty well known in the Instagram review universe and was like, oh, what do you have coming up? And I was like, whatever they pick tonight, all 3 of these are exceptional barrels. Like whatever barrel doesn't get selected, or whichever 2 or whatever doesn't get picked, like those barrels are going to sell super quick because they have that kind of profile where people are going to be like, oh yeah, I want that thing.
Damn.
Yeah, man, if you put these in a 200 ml pack and I came through the distillery, it was like, hey, let me try each one of those real quick. Like, yeah, I want all of them. Just box them up. I'll be out of here.
Slam.
That is like a real trifecta because it really does check a lot of boxes.
Oh, man. I have a hard time. I honestly, too, yeah, like I could make a case for all 3 of these. And I think the only thing that would stop me from just being like, yeah, we'll take them all. It's like, and it's rarely a con, but like the yield on these is extremely healthy. Some places are like, well, this one's amazing, but it only yielded 90 bottles. And you're like, well, shit, but I'm looking at 29.49 and I see 276 bottles and I'm like, yay, hell yeah. But that's a lot of bottles. I think that's going to a lot of people, but I think if we can narrow down to 2, that's probably a good, but of course that's even harder because like 2 wine, 1 not wine, 1 wine. So like, I guess that's a lot of words to say. Like, I'm kind of stuck here, but I'm curious to see.
I would say, and it hurts me and pains me a little bit because of the the sticker ability. But 2423, as much as I love the high proof and all of that, that would be if we had to kick one barrel off the island, that's the one. Because I think it's so interesting because it is so high proof and the alcohol integration is so good. But I'm not passing up on 2949 because I just want to keep drinking it. And 775, I think, is just like one of the best examples of like American single malt that I've tasted in quite some time. So that's where I'm leaning. But yeah, and I like that. I feel like I'm playing like a game show right now. I have my cards and I'm like,
I know. I've been here like
I'm printing. If I wasn't so unorganized, I would do this on every single barrel pick I did. I wish that every distiller did that because it is amazing. I feel like I'm hosting a game show. I got a jacket on. I got cards in hand.
No, you're right though. I've been over here like nervously shuffling my cards. Like, oh man, which
I was just drawing pictures on mine.
John's like, I'm just over here doodling. Like, what are y'all doing?
I get a whole new Seelbachs logo drawn up and everything.
This still has a mustache.
Yeah.
It's at this exact moment that John realized that the other side of the cards has printed technical information that we didn't just send in scratch paper.
There's even pictures. I thought these were note cards for each one, so I could write down my ideas.
They sent a kids menu, but I do agree. I'm curious though. I have thoughts, but I'm curious about your thoughts, John. What do you if we were to narrow, kick one out here, which one would you boot?
It would be tough for me. I think I would probably. Geez, I don't know. I think I would place 2949 at the top of my list right now, but I think that for me is the easier part right now. Is saying that I think that jumps out as being something that I could picture myself having on, like a campfire night. I could picture this on a cool autumn night after hunting. I could take this with me to camp. I mean, there's like a lot of ways that I feel like I could see myself sitting down having a pour of this. And so it's stacking up more in the yes column than the others right now. But I have a hard time saying which I want to get rid of first. So let me not answer your question by telling you that.
I knew this was happening. I do
for political office or something.
Which is funny.
We're meeting to talk to you about that.
Yeah. Of the two of us, like I'm usually like, whoa, like you could be more subtle about that. And he's like,
this one sucks. We don't want it. Yeah.
But I agree. So as fun as the draw of like hazmat American single malt is, and I really loved it. So I'm gonna say like, I think that 2949 I think is so fabulous that I can't not take it. And I love how exemplary the malt character in 775 was. So it's not that 2423 like that hazmat guy is like bad or lacking anyway. It just isn't quite as exceptional as the other two. But like when someone does buy that, you should tell me because I want to go and like buy several.
So what we're trying to say is, Chris, let us know which account does take it, and we'll all be buyers.
I still want a bottle of that.
Yeah, we'll pull like a oh shoot, 12 bottles fell off the truck, but here's the rest. Like go sell it. And then like
I will tell you the sibling cast to the 2423, the wine barrel, the red wine cast. That just sold to a retailer out in Washington and Anacortes called Compass Wine and Spirits, which is a great little account. They've been huge supporters of ours. But yeah, they've got the sibling cast. But yeah, we obviously you guys have first right of refusal on these, so your barrels have been kind of locked away with this idea of being like, yeah, when they tell us what they want, then we'll open them back up. But again, it's not my decision. It should never be. I think to me the right idea is 775 plus one of the others. The reality is that you want to be able to get the experience of like what is flagship Westland, what is classic Westland. And I don't know if there's a better example of it with Westland with that level of age in the marketplace aside from 775. Like that is quintessential. That is, and I'm not to be like nostalgic about this, but I remember going to Westland when I was talking to Matt. This is almost 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago now. About coming to work at Westland after having worked for Gordon MacPhail in the U.S. for 7 or 8 years, and I remember it was one of those moments where I was like, I tasted American oak, and I was just like, how can I not want to be a part of a place that makes whiskey like this? It is like I still vividly, I can still taste that whiskey on my tongue. I remember when I accepted the offer at Westland to come work here, I grabbed a handful handfill. Back when we used to do them as 375s at the distillery, and I brought that thing with me when I hiked the Connecticut and Massachusetts portions of the Appalachian Trail as like I don't know, whatever the hell you do when you're in between jobs and you want to like blow off a bunch of steam. That's basically that. And I just remember like sharing it with people, like just random people that you'd meet on the trail, and like they were like, "No, I'm like selling the whiskey before I'm even collecting a paycheck. Look at this guy."
That's amazing.
I remember just having this moment where I was like, I'm excited about this whiskey. I'm not even technically on the team yet. Like it's a month before I start, and just being like, yeah, this is quintessential Westland. And 775 brought me back to a lot of those same feelings because it's that air dried oak 5 malt. It's what we do. It's what we're known for.
That's a good point. I like, so I mean, not to like put the cart before the horse, but we definitely have 775, the fun employment hike, and then 2949, the raisin at the turn. But I agree. Like I loved both of the sherried ones, but it felt wrong to take 2 sherried with how good it's just like it's a perfect single malt. Like it has all that really great character, and it would seem silly with how good it is not to like show off that base character and then show what wine can do to it afterwards. So I think that's pretty cool. And
I can't wait to get Jay's email that offers me the ability to put myself into the raffle for the distillery that I actually work for and still get denied for it. I'm really excited about that. Like that's going to be sweet.
Imagine when you just don't get to buy a bottle of these selections that you're helping us select right now.
It's going to be fantastic.
That
I
is
know a reader if you need help, Chris. So
I think we can probably put you on the VIP for.
I would hope so. For once in my life,
a VIP.
John's been slumming it with everyone else. Well,
fuckers.
I think that the odds of people botting our Westland release are probably good, so you can rest easy. We'll make sure you get one. But I think John. So Mr. Undecided there. What if we took 775 and 2949? Would you?
I'm good with that.
Oh, okay. Well, that was easy.
Well, I couldn't pick one that I didn't like.
It's a hard part. That's like
I mean, I know that I want a bottle of 2949. Whatever that goes, I would hunt down a bottle for it. Mm-hmm. I like it, and that's what I want. Between the other two, I could go either way, but it makes more sense to get the core expression. Like this is the whiskey before these other ones went into a different cask. So getting, especially like you said, this is an old fill cask. This is a 775. Like look at the numbers on the other ones. They're up over 3,000 most likely. So getting something that is going to be that much older of an original expression, so to speak, makes plenty of sense.
And Chris, these are already bottled, correct?
They are, yeah. So we do our single barrel program a little bit differently. So in order to ensure that, because especially I've always been surprised by this, distilleries that produce young whiskey send out barrel samples, and then it can be 6 months before that barrel actually gets degorged and bottled. And then you're like, this whiskey is fundamentally different from what we tasted. I didn't want any of that. So we bottle I think I saw it in the comments. We did 25 casks for this year's run. We are going to dramatically increase that over the coming years. It's been loud and clear. People want the level of accessibility that comes in a single cask. They want those sort of unique moments in time. And honestly, I'm a fan of selling whiskey 20 cases at a time. That works for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, it gives me some security, which is really nice, and same for Blake. Like, it's nice when you see, because some places they're like, oh yeah, it's usually this, and then inevitably you get that email. It's happened to me a couple times this year. They're like, whoops, it's a short barrel. There's only 66 bottles, and you're like, oh, like this. I was hoping for 200. I got 66. Like, it's nice to know what you're getting right away, and then it's just
you get to piss off 3 times more people.
We did have leakers. I don't even want to. They're not really leakers. That's not fair to our production team. There are distilleries in the state of Tennessee that we have bought ex Maplewood cask from, and those things leak like a sieve. I mean, every one of those barrels was under 150 bottles, which for us, for outturn, that is incredibly low. We had a barrel this year that I want to say was like a 66 bottle outturn, which I mean, those just kind of floor me, because in all of my years at Westland, in all my years in the industry, you don't see that in barley-based distillate. You don't see 66 bottle casks unless they're like 80, or 60, 70, 80 years old. Then you'll get some of those kind of things where it's like crazy low outturns. But that is not something that you typically see, certainly at an American distillery that makes a barley-based distillate.
Well, I like it. It's nice to see, it, and I like it too. Like, we're tasting it as exactly as it's in the bottle, because I really like New Riff, because
I think that's brilliant.
You select and your barrel is dumped within a week. That's not always a guarantee everywhere else. So it's really nice. Like, we're tasting a snapshot in time, and that's what's bottled, and that's what people are going to get. So I think it's pretty easy to say 775 and 2949. What do you think, Blake?
No, I'm all for that. I'm still just thinking about how I like this setup. I mean, I've had some where I'm questioning, like, I don't think I got the right cask, and I've gone back and like proofed the samples and proofed what I got, and I'm like, it's 2 points different. And they're like, well, what do you want us to tell you? It sat for 4 more months in the barrel. I'm like, okay, well, thanks.
When I think too, like, they usually expect people to be like, oh, sweet, that's a feature. But I'm like, no, I liked how it tasted 4 months ago.
Right, I selected it. I liked it.
I don't want to roll the dice now. I don't.
Yeah,
really.
As someone that's a pretty voracious consumer of like Kenny and is it Ryan over at Bourbon Pursuit, their podcast, they had a great episode not that long ago where they were talking about.
We don't talk nice about them on this show. We don't.
Oh, you don't? Like, I thought you were contractually obligated.
Yeah, only on that show do I have to talk. Not over here.
The round table of fractures.
But there was this really interesting point where they were saying, like, you'll go to some of these places, and it's not to pick on any distillery. Listen, everyone runs their barrel program the way they want to. I've been really fortunate that I've gotten to put a spin to this that I think gives me and my team the most compelling set of casks to bring to the marketplace. But this thing where it's like, oh, taste it at cask, and then we're going to bottle it at 40 or 45 or 43. It's like, what the hell is that supposed to teach you about the whiskey?
Yeah,
like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I have never, ever, and I taste more whiskey than I should on a given day. The reality is I've never been able to take a sample and be like, this is the number of drops that's going to put this thing at 45 out of cask strength. Like, I lack that mathematical prowess.
Yeah,
I'm with you, man.
I think we've all done one live at Buffalo Trace when they're like, okay, we're going to fill it up this much, and then we're going to add this much water, and that's what it's going to taste like. I'm like, I don't think that.
It doesn't feel right.
That's why I went and bought one of those fancy pipettes.
I know.
So I could get less inaccurate. But, and we've all done a day in Bardstown too, right? Where they're like, here's your sample at 141 proof, and we're going to dilute it down to just over 45. And you're like, I hope this tastes the same.
Fingers crossed here.
The odds are low, but I believe in them, and, you're like trying to dab water in there too. But yeah, I like this. You taste it exactly how everyone else in the audience is going to taste it, and I think that is super cool.
I see there was someone in the comments was asking about a special label. So it is one of the things that we offer. So obviously you guys will be able to do the personalization stickers We'll order those, and then I will probably fly down or take the train down to DC, and with like a stack of labels, be like hand applying each of them to the bottles, which is super fun. So there'll be a little bit of, my sweat equity on each one of your bottles. I don't know if that's a feature or not.
I was going to say, usually they just
it's free
and they tell me to apply them myself. But if you want to come down, I'll make sure I'm there and we'll have a drink at least.
I would say, yeah, I'd fly in. This sounds like a good barbecue opportunity.
Yeah.
Oh, I like where this is going. I like where this is going for sure. Yeah, I'm absolutely in.
Man, if only we took that third barrel, we could call it sweat equity.
Seriously.
Yeah, geez, Chris, we need you on for every barrel.
Yeah,
I'm ready. I'm here. I am. No, this is awesome. Obviously, I'm super thrilled that you guys were willing to consider us. I know it was. I remember when I sent the first email, I was like, I know this is a stretch. I was like, but would you consider not bourbon? And he was like, yeah, of course we would. And I thought that was so great because, I find whiskey communities can one of two spectrums, right? They can be like the most incredible, welcoming, awesome places, or they can be like effectively not so kind pits of despair.
Nightmare.
And I'll give the Our Bourbon community a ton of credit. Like, it is a place where people, for the most part, want to be engaged. They want to talk about great whiskey. And yeah, even though it's called Our Bourbon and obviously it's slanted more towards corn-based distillate, there's this appetite for interesting and unique and things with, I mean, obviously pat ourselves on the back, but like transparency and a desire to like inform people. We take that sort of mantle of responsibility really seriously at Westland. Like, we are effectively the voice of this entirely new style of whiskey, and to do that properly and to make sure that people know that American single malt isn't Scotch in America. I can't more emphatically say that, other than like, this is about as serious as I ever get. Like, we are not Scotch in America. I have no interest in being the Speyside whiskey of Seattle. Like, that is not what we do. I had a great career working in Scotland with Gordon MacPhail and Ben Romick. Love my time there. But the reality is that the whiskey that they make and the whiskey that we make, or frankly any producer there, we're separated by a fairly large gap here. The consistency is in the barley, but there is a desire to create that is just really exciting coming out of American single malt producers right now.
I love it. I mean, I think it's super cool. And you hit on the point that I really wanted to drive home for people before we wrap it up as we hit the top of the hour, is that American single malt is not Scotch made in America. Scotch is made in Scotland. Super interesting, super different, but we have different grain. We have different climate, even though it's all still barley. And I want people to think of this as a different take on American whiskey. And I think that's exactly what this is. Like, both of these taste amazing American whiskeys in different ways. And it would be really hard for me to be like, oh yeah, this is totally just 1-to-1 with like a Glendronach port finish and maybe Glenallachie or something. So like, I think that's a perfect point. Like, this is not Scotch in America. This is American single malt. This is why people are pushing for the legislation to protect American single malt, because it's its own beast. It's its own thing, and it's growing. And quite frankly, it's delicious. So I think that's a great way to go out. And on that soapboxy note there, but I think this was great. I was really kind of interested to see what you guys brought to the table. Obviously, we found two we love. So first off, thank you. And it's cool. It's always nice when you guys got a nice kit. I love the cards here. I'm just going to game show my way through, the rest of the year. Hope more people send these. But I think it's super cool. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Blake, obviously Seelbachs Bourboner. So you guys know where this will be carried. This will be at Seelbachs. If you are interested in barrels that are going on right now, we have our 4 Nashville Barrel Company, which are working their way through the lottery system. We'll go ahead and talk offline. We'll figure out the logistics. We'll get this thing going, bottled up, labeled, and we'll have some fun with it and have an ETA on time. But this has been a great selection. Chris, thanks so much for your time. Love the samples. Love what we picked. And if you want more from us, you can find us here on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have another selection. I think Blake, you'll be on for this one too. Friday is Heaven's Door. So
yep,
that'll be
3 o'clock for that.
That'll be a happy hour barrel selection, which I guess is probably the right way to go into the weekend. But
and with my next guest, I'm going to bring on. Let's see here. Let me check the cards.
Come on down out of the audience.
Bob Dylan. What?
Chris, this is the best piece of marketing y'all may have done, because I'm going to bring this on every single live stream of a barrel pick I do, and I'm going to, just show the cards. Like, okay, here we go. It doesn't matter the brand.
Huge shout out to Steve Hawley at Westland, our VP of marketing, who decided that he was like, the kits, it's not enough just to have the bottles with the numbers on it. He's like, people are going to want to know what it is, and it's better to have it than an email, because I don't know, for me, when I'm doing like a selection, when I'm tasting through things, I don't want my computer, I don't want a phone, I just want to like be in the moment. There's really nothing like paper and pencil when it comes to that stuff.
And like, boy, are they pretty. Like, oh man,
well, that's why
they are pretty.
Like, I love it. So, well, thank you again, guys. Thanks for joining us. This has been another barrel selection on Liquid Whiskey. If you want to support what we do, we are at patreon.com/thewhiskeynet. And we will see you guys here again on Friday and then next Tuesday when we blend with Penelope. And stick around, guys. We'll have some drinks in the green room. But thanks for everyone. I'm going to go drink more of this 2423, and my head hurts tomorrow. I know exactly why. So cheers, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys.